Blitzing Russia and the war with NATO. According to Putin and his minions, NATO countries are on the brink of war with Russia. Is this more hollow bluffing and bluster from the diminutive tyrant in the Kremlin? Or are we about to cross the first genuine Russian red line of the war? Evidence points to it being another empty threat. If we ignore the threatening words and look at Russia's actions and capabilities. The first action was for Russia's FSB security service to revoke the accreditation of 6 British diplomats in reaction to a widely held belief that the use of British Storm Shadows will be authorised for use on the territory of Russia. These Moscow-based personnel have been accused of spying and sabotage work. The 6 diplomats were named on Russian state TV, and photographs of them were shown. As we already know, Russian propagandists love to position the British as their core enemy, the main bastards, so-called, and see British plotting as instrumental in pulling Washington away from its cautious escalation management policies towards taking a harder line against Russia and in support of a Ukrainian victory. Delusional and paranoid? Maybe it is, but this seems to be the thinking of the war-addicted elite in Moscow media and policymaking circles. Vladimir Putin said that a Western move to let Kiev use longer-range weapons against targets inside Russia would effectively mean that NATO is at war with Moscow. It is known that the US and UK diplomats are discussing easing rules on firing Western weapons into Russia. Kiev has been pressing for this change in policy for many months now, and indeed, it makes no military sense at all to restrict Ukraine for firing back on the airfields and launch sites that deliver death and trauma to Ukrainian civilians daily. It's purely a political restriction, one born of fear of Moscow's red lines, that is, red lines that Moscow has stated and threatened, and others that we have simply imagined for ourselves. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer told Putin that it was he who started the war in Ukraine and he who could end it at any time. Russia started this conflict, he said. Russia illegally invaded Ukraine. Russia can end this conflict straight away. Ukraine has the right to self-defense. Well, that's perfectly clear and well stated. Reinforcing Putin's threats, one of his allies has accused NATO states of direct participation in military action. Chairman of Russia's State Duma on Friday accused NATO of being a direct party to military action in Ukraine, suggesting that it was already heavily involved in military decision-making. The comments made by Vyacheslav Volodin came a day after Putin warned that the West would be directly fighting with Russia if it allowed Ukraine to strike Russian territory with Western-made long-range missiles. There are some interesting nuances and details to Putin's speech, however, which shows he has been briefed in detail by his military advisors. He suggested that the UK weapons require satellite targeting data from US and European allies, and possibly approval of launch codes from the US. And potentially, the complex guidance system may need to be programmed by Western experts, as Ukraine lacks the expertise to do this. So his assertion that we would be in direct conflict with Russia has, at least in his own mind, some rational underpinnings. Whether these details are true, of course, is something that only a military expert can comment on. What is also fascinating about this interview with Putin, filmed just outside the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, is that he indirectly admitted that occupied Donbass and Crimea are not Russian, because this clearly has not triggered war with Russia. And clearly, Western-guided weapons are already in use there. And his arguments about our control of them would also apply to those territories. He also acknowledged that Ukraine was hitting Russia at will with its drones, potentially admitting a huge flaw in Russia's defense and war strategy. Did Putin look and sound concerned? No, he reeled off these so-called facts, but looked tired, drawn, and a little defeated. Volodin further stated that NATO is helping Ukraine choose which Russian cities to target, of agreeing specific military action, and of giving Kiev orders. This is nothing but an attempt to camouflage and conceal their direct participation in military action, he said. But Ukraine will likely hit only military targets, not cities, with these munitions, as has been its long-standing policy. This is, of course, in sharp contrast to what Russia does with its weapons. Why is it so important that we authorize the use of these long-range weapons on the territory of Russia now? Well, one, of course, is to support Ukraine's crucial Kursk offensive that has put tremendous military and political pressure on Putin. The other is what the UK government has labelled a significant escalation as Iran supplies Russia with more armaments. Well, we're going to cover that off in the next episode of Silicon Wafers. Now, this follows the visit of the UK Foreign Secretary and US Secretary of State's visit to Kiev this week, where they heard directly from President Zelensky about Ukraine's current position against Russia's ongoing barbaric invasion and the importance of long-range strike capability. This so-called significant escalation relates to the transfer by Iran of ballistic munitions to Russia, bolstering Putin's capability to continue his illegal war. But at the time of recording this video, no specific statements have yet been made about allowing Ukraine to use longer-range weapons against targets inside Russia. The New York Times suggested overnight that Biden will be minded to approve the use of NATO-supplied weapons launched at targets inside Russia by Ukraine. They write, President Biden appears on the verge of clearing the way for Ukraine to launch long-range Western weapons deep inside Russian territory, as long as it doesn't use arms provided by the US. That is, according to European officials. We know, of course, that Britain is eager to let Ukraine use Storm Shadow to strike Russian military targets far from the Ukrainian border and has shown far less timidity and caution than some of its allies. We'll recall the spectacular strike on the Russian Black Sea Fleet headquarters with Storm Shadow Scalp missiles, another red line that proved to be illusory and just an empty threat. Biden has hesitated to allow Ukraine to use American weapons in the same way, apparently after warnings from American intelligence agencies that Russia could respond by aiding Iran in targeting American forces in the Middle East. This is, unfortunately, appeasement at work. Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk dismissed comments by Putin about the risk of escalation, saying it is necessary to take all events in Ukraine and on the Ukrainian-Russian front very seriously, but I would not attach excessive importance to the latest statements from President Putin. They rather show the difficult situations the Russians have on the front. And as mentioned above, Putin's threats are indicative of his weak position, not of strength. It was Russia's FSB security service that revoked the accreditation of 6 British diplomats in Moscow. The FSB claimed it had documents showing that a British Foreign Office department in London was coordinating what it called the escalation of the political and military situation, and was tasked with ensuring Russia's strategic defeat in its war against Ukraine. Well, that's probably not too far from the truth, as Britain is one of Ukraine's staunchest allies and has shown that it is less cowed by Russia's so-called red lines and nuclear blackmail threats. The facts revealed give grounds to consider activities of British diplomats sent to Moscow by the Directorate as threatening security of the Russian Federation, said the FSB. Meanwhile, Russia is acting in other spheres and potentially is significantly escalating its hostile actions towards the international community. It's been accused of an unprecedented attack on a grain ship in the Black Sea. The attack marks the first time a projectile has struck a civilian vessel transporting grain in open waters of the Black Sea. Ukraine claimed that Russia used strategic bombers to strike the civilian grain vessel in Black Sea waters near NATO member Romania. This is likely to escalate tensions between Moscow and the defensive military alliance. The Turkish registered vessel was carrying grain to Egypt and was hit overnight by a Russian munition just after it left Ukraine's territorial waters. Just after it left Ukrainian territorial waters, there were no casualties. Ukraine's new foreign minister, Andrei Sybiha, said the strike was a brazen attack on freedom of navigation and global food security. This is undoubtedly true, as Russia is showing its true colors as a country controlled by a terrorist mafia rather than a responsible statesman. Russia's actions not only threaten the international order and lawful trade, but also create echoes of the blockade of the Black Sea that threatened to inflict hunger on the world in 2022. There is also some symbolism here, with Turkish President Erdogan making a speech saying that Crimea is sovereign Ukrainian territory and must be returned to uphold international law and the global order. And shortly afterwards, a Turkish asset is attacked in a completely brazen fashion. The US and the UK may or may not be on the verge of allowing Kiev to use Western-made long-range weapons to strike those deep targets within Russian territory. This would, I think, be a completely appropriate response to the escalation of terror attacks, both within Ukraine and internationally by Russia. According to unnamed officials, Biden is finalizing the details of a plan to lift some of those restrictions, according to Politico. And as The Guardian writes, the UK has already privately decided to allow Ukraine to use its British-supplied Storm Shadow missiles for long-range strikes deep into Russia, though, of course, as we record this, no public announcement has been made, as I said earlier. Kiev has long argued for the restrictions to be lifted so it can strike military targets, such as airfields located deep inside Russian territory. With the bans in place, Kiev says it cannot effectively defend Ukrainian cities from intensifying aerial attacks. While the UK is at least open to the possibility of allowing Ukraine to use Storm Shadows, the same cannot be said for Germany and its Taurus. Taurus is a joint German-Swedish-made cruise munition with a range of over 500 kilometers, which would allow Kiev to hit targets even deeper inside Russia. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has consistently been against sending these to Ukraine, even for strikes on Russian-occupied areas of Ukraine. Scholz has come under continuous and intense pressure from allies, but has not relented. And now we come to the title of the episode, Unleashing a Blitz on Targets in Russia, whose cities have been left defenseless as Ukraine ramps up drone production and deployment. In recent months, Ukraine has increased the number of strikes using homemade drones against Russian critical infrastructure and military targets. Although fuel storage and electricity generating infrastructure is dual use in many instances, it is nonetheless essential to powering Russia's war machine. Faced with attacks using dozens of drones simultaneously, Russian air defense has proved to be overstretched and often ineffective. There are limitations to protecting all targets effectively, said Matthias Ecken, a defense and security expert at RAND Europe. The objective is to demonstrate to the Russian populace that the state's defensive capabilities are insufficient, highlighting vulnerabilities within Russia. This is more important than we realize in bringing the war home to Russians. The apathy and lack of empathy that's been shown by many Russians, not just to Ukrainian victims, but also to their own countrymen in Kursk, is breathtaking. And the Ukrainian leadership have realized that to stimulate Russians into wanting to end the war must be brought to their very doorsteps. Since early September, Ukraine has conducted 2 massive attacks on Russia, reportedly using at least 144 drones in one and 158 in the other, according to Russian authorities. Ukrainian authorities have not commented on either attack, neither the targeting nor the impact of them. The September 10th attack targeted various regions within Russia, including Bryansk, Moscow, Tula, Kaluga, Belgorod, Kursk, Oryol, Voronezh oblasts, and Krasnodarsk Krai. If Ukraine maintains pressure on the Russian industrial and military sites and potential targets, that is going to have a significant consequence on how Russia fights, said Samuel Bendit, a senior fellow at the Center for a New American Security think tank. Nearly 20 countries have united in a drone coalition aiming to bolster Ukraine's arsenal of unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs. In March, Digital Transformation Minister Mikhailo Fedorov said that Ukraine has expanded its drone market to the point where it can produce more than 1 or even 2 million drones a year with the help of partners. It has also been able to scale up the training of experts, the gathering of data from the field, and drone innovation. As Ukraine increases drone production, Russian air defense is increasingly showing its vulnerability. Recent Ukrainian targets have included oil refineries, airfields, weapons, and ammunition depots. Utilizing many drones plays a crucial role in overpowering and fatiguing Russia's air defense systems. Equally important is ensuring that the cost of drones remains lower than the missiles deployed to intercept them, Eken commented. Piling the pressure on the Russian war machine is strategically critical for Ukraine to survive, but applying pressure to the civilian population through an aerial blitz that targets energy infrastructure and brings the war to their home turf is a crucial psychological action that could result in a knockout blow, leading to victory when combined with other tactics and offensives. Slava Ukraini.